Hello, I'm Paddy Delaney, and welcome to Integrated Infrastructure, a podcast dedicated to bringing you news and views from industry leaders involved in the development, design, construction and management of the many built forms that make up Australia's integrated infrastructure. Mark, welcome to Integrated Infrastructure. It's fantastic to have you on today, and I'm excited to talk to you. As always, if you could introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you're about, and about your organisation, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paddy. So, Mark Wright, I'm the Managing Director of Fefo Consulting, and more recently the Health and Safety Index. So my background has been in health and safety for many, many years. I've worked both as a regulator and prosecutor, and also with some large corporates, including Lease, Rio Tinto, both domestically here in Australia and a stint overseas. So lots and lots of different organisations I've worked in and around, and more recently in the last 3 years, dipped my toe into the consulting world, and here I am.
Fantastic. I actually didn't realise you'd worked on the regulator side as well. Was that the beginning of your career?
Yeah, that's right. It's not something that I talk to too many people about.
The word prosecute is a bit like.
Yeah, exactly. So I think as a young guy coming out of university, having that sort of exposure was fantastic.
Yeah.
But, certainly, I get a lot more joy out of helping people be proactive as opposed to going in as a regulator after the event.
Yeah, absolutely. You must have seen some pretty hairy things in your time then.
Oh, look, absolutely. So, this podcast isn't about being a regulator, but certainly one of the most memorable stories is sitting in a courtroom next to a widow of a gentleman who lost his life. And I still recall sitting there after leading the prosecution, and I still remember just sitting there knowing that any sum of money was not going to bring the husband back, sitting there with a daughter. So yeah, those sorts of things stick with you for a lifetime, I think.
That's given me the chills listening to you sort of talking about that. Is that quite a motivator for you then, in terms of what you've then come on to do later on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think the art of storytelling and being authentic around why you're doing things is really important. Unfortunately, that's not the only fatality that I've investigated over the years. So yeah, it certainly motivates me to get out of bed, and certainly my team too.
Yeah, brilliant. That's fantastic. Talking about storytelling, give us an idea. Let's talk about sort of the last 5 years and how health and safety has changed. I mean, there's been just this last year has been bonkers, hasn't it, in terms of the things that we've had to deal with. But if there's been an arc in the last sort of 5 years with all these mega projects coming along and enormous things happening in cities and what have you, what's been the change, and what have you seen?
Yeah, so I think 5 years ago there was a heavy reliance on external international standards and a lot of best practice thinking that had come out of leading consulting firms who in their own right were doing a really good job and basing a lot of I guess their thought leadership around what they believed was important and how well they marketed their particular products. What I'd say in the last couple of years in particular, more and more organisations are becoming accustomed to making decisions based on credible research and data. So I think in particular in the safety realm, Griffith University has been leading that space around having some really high profile academics coming out with some really challenging thinking around what the industry is doing at the moment. And a lot of people have sort of cottoned onto that and really questioned the way that things have operated in the past doesn't necessarily mean we need to continue down that path. I mean, there's lots of different theories and concepts that have come out of Griffith Uni and various academics. But I guess as an outcome to that, people are, I think, making more informed decisions based on research.
Are there any sort of specific areas that you can identify that have come out of that research and that you're seeing put into practice now?
Yeah, look, I mean, the most obvious ones, I think, around health and safety is definitely the health and wellbeing component. When you spoke about the last 12 months and the impact COVID has had on industry and organisations, and even from a personal point of view, I think a lot of people can have a bit of a story around how it's impacted them on a personal note. And I think as an outcome to that, in the past, people have struggled to understand how to manage health and wellbeing because it is something that is a little bit less tangible, not as objective. Unlike physical safety, where you can touch and feel it, a lot of these more ambiguous concepts are a little bit harder for people to get their head around. And I think with the introduction of a lot more awareness in the community, not just in the workplace, around health and wellbeing, more and more people are becoming accustomed to relying on research to be able to make decisions and data to be able to inform what they're doing in the workplace, as opposed to what may have been done traditionally is to have a fruit bowl or use lower order controls to fix an issue. People are looking at a little bit more broadly and relying on informed decisions based on what the research is telling us.
Yeah, it's good though. I mean, it's qualitative and quantitative data, and it's the qualitative that really tells you what's happening to people, you know, in their heads, and that's actually where you need to get to, isn't it? Is to understand what people are thinking, and the reasons for their behaviours and their actions, and how they're going to follow through on processes. What about physical safety? Are there any particular sort of big areas that have changed in the last 5 years?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we do with Fefo Consulting is around critical risk management, contractor management, safety and design, along with some more traditional safety consulting around audits and systems development and training. What I would say is that with a bigger push for organisations to come up with things that are based on quality rather than quantity, particularly my time at Rio Tinto in the mining industry and the oil and gas industry, who are a little bit more mature and have a lot more resources, this concept of focusing on critical controls and how effective the controls are as a lead indicator, I believe is really important. So I think the move towards looking at the quality of controls as opposed to the quantity of activity that takes place is really important. And what I would say too is, if you look at the supply chain from when a contract starts and finishes, the focus on safety and design up front, particularly with infrastructure, large infrastructure projects, I think probably still doesn't have the amount of focus it deserves, because there are a lot of things that can be sort of designed out and a lot of headaches that can be avoided up front. A bit of a cliche, but still isn't always done that effectively. I also think looking at procurement, both for goods and services, and how safety can be integrated through the procurement process, again, is a bit of untapped market, I believe, in terms of really trying to get a better return on investment around safety, as opposed to trying to come in at the back end of a project. Things are already set up.
Well, so actually defining that in the scope of the project and putting it into contractual terms in terms of performance, and trying to encourage designers or contractors to think about it much earlier in the process.
Yeah, that's right. So even the selection process. So when I was with Rio Tinto, I worked in a major contracts role where often differentiating between the likes of Chevron and Shell was almost impossible in terms of taking a traditional pre-qualification process, because their systems were also good. Some of them were better than Rio. So what we did is we tried to look at, well, how could they add value back into our supply chain, not only from a commercial point of view, but from a safety point of view. And selecting them, even before contract stage, selecting them based on their value that they could add, as opposed to ticking a minimum standard. So if you take some of those concepts around adding value very early on, either through the procurement process, through safety and design, or even looking at culture. We can talk a bit about the health and safety index later if we have time. But certainly trying to partner with organisations, partner with your supply chain, partner with your major contractors around having a shared value proposition or a common belief and culture around what's important. Not only health and safety, but more generally, I think can be a bit of a differentiator as opposed to, those basic system compliance requirements.
Yeah, no, fantastic. We're definitely going to talk about the health and safety index, because I think it's a really interesting business that you've set up there. But it goes back to that, what you were saying about research and the work that I know you've put a lot of work into it. And before we do, mental health, well-being is such a big issue in the industry now, isn't it? And it's getting the attention it needs, with people like Mates getting involved, and there are some other initiatives. It's being driven by lots of different directions. I think I've mentioned to you before, and the Concord Hospital, for example, that Roberts and Co are doing, and working the 5-day week. What other examples have you seen of health and safety from a well-being point of view and mental health point of view in the marketplace, and what do you think is working?
Yeah, look, good question. What I will say before I answer that is I'm not a mental health and wellbeing expert. I do have a team, both Kate and Sally, who have frontline mental health experience and backgrounds in psychology. So I'll just preface that with...
That's okay. I'm not either.
But I can certainly give you some, I guess, insights into what we're seeing as a team.
Yeah.
And my observations is that I think as people are becoming more informed around what to do and a little bit more experienced and mature, is that the emphasis on health and wellbeing has been more, it is being more and more placed on organisations as opposed to the individual. So an analogy I heard on another podcast recently actually was manual handling. How do you design out the risk or the demand on the person from an organisational perspective, either by avoiding the task or reducing the load or looking at job design, as opposed to telling someone to go to the gym and lift heavier weights. Similarly with health and wellbeing and mental health in particular, often the focus has been on training and resilience and the focus on the individual, as opposed to looking at the job demands and the job resources. And often if there's a mismatch between the job demands, that is the pressure placed on the individual or the teams, versus how that's being managed, that ends up impacting in some shape or form on the individual or the worker. So I guess our challenge to a lot of organisations is, yes, training's great and those lower order controls are really important, but also let's challenge ourselves around how you're setting your teams and organisation up for success, around formally evaluating some of those psychosocial risks and some of those organisational factors, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's about setting people up for success at the end of the day. It's really interesting because you're close to the construction industry, as am I. In particular, civil engineering contractors, the big ones, have really struggled in the last few years to make money, because of tough contractual situations, project blowouts, issues on, whether it's, the light rail and the utilities, but, issues that are coming up they're not expecting. That's actually putting lots of pressure on teams because they're trying to run lean teams with less people than they probably should have, and it's putting a lot of pressure on people. Going back to your earlier point about trying to mitigate these issues early on in the process through contracts and what have you, it's really important, isn't it? And especially when the government's looking at new projects now.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I'm sure there's lots of people can tell stories around not getting the commercials right up front in contracts, and the flow-on effect that has years and years later, not only commercially, but the impact on individuals. And what we're seeing too is, certainly from a safety point of view, shortcuts are often taken. Not always because people want to do the wrong thing or get up out of bed and say we're going to do a few safety violations today and put ourselves at risk. Often it's because of those organisational pressures that come about because of all these other things that are placing people in a position, be it the culture or the commercial arrangements, where people are taking shortcuts to get the job done because of some expectations put on them by the organisation or the contract itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about that culture point is probably quite a nice segue into actually talking about the health and safety index, isn't it? In terms of what you're doing there. Now, you told me about it a few weeks ago when we sort of first got to talk to each other. But talk me through it again, because it seems like a really smart way to create and to change behaviour and create really good behaviours and understand your workforce as well.
Yeah, so I mean, where it came about is a little bit of frustration at my end and an identified need in the marketplace. My wife works in HR as a director for an unnamed tech company, and I was often coming home saying HR have put out another employee engagement survey and forgotten to put safety in, or safety was an afterthought, and a real missed opportunity, I think, given the importance of employee engagement surveys. So my wife challenged me and said, Mark, well, rather than complaining and trying to have safety as an afterthought, why don't you create one yourself, a survey that is a health and safety survey that also considers employee engagement. So what we did is, rather than creating a culture survey, which often takes years to shift and measure anyway, and is a little bit bigger and broader, is that we've created a health and safety index as a lead indicator to get feedback at scale from the organisation. So when I say a health and safety survey, what I'm talking about is 4 aspects, including organisational engagement, individual safety leadership, systems from a user experience point of view, and lastly, health and wellbeing, as we spoke about. That being a really important topic at the moment. And what we're finding is that there's a high level of interdependencies between those aspects. So rather than looking at engagement in isolation or safety leadership in isolation, we're actually looking at those 4 aspects all together. And be it time pressures, be it the impacts on shift workers, be it the way leaders are having effective conversations or not providing enough praise or recognition, all these things impact on health and safety. So what we're able to do is play back to the organisation in a really simple report based on feedback from their organisation of what their observations are, where the hotspots are around what's working, what's not working, and areas for improvement. So, I mean, to date, we've worked with a number of organisations. When I can talk about a little bit about some of those organisations and outcomes in a second, but in terms of setting up the survey and how we designed it and the thinking behind it, is that we did take our time to get it right. So we engaged an organisational psychologist, a PhD out of Murdoch Uni, to help us validate the survey. So we invited lots of large corporates, a lot of which were from the infrastructure and construction industries, to use the survey in its development and get the design right. So I'm not a stats expert, but certainly having someone design it to ensure that it's both valid and reliable means that we can go to confidence and establish a benchmark with a fair bit of reliability, that the results are going to be relatively consistent time and time again to help with that benchmarking.
Yeah, fantastic. And give us some of those examples and you know, about who you've been working with, if you can, or you know, some examples of where you've seen the benefits and how it's worked.
Yeah, so the way that's designed is that it has a lot of common behaviours and conditions that we're trying to evaluate. So it's not industry specific. It can be used across multiple geographies. So some organisations that we've worked with is JLL, so Jones Lang LaSalle, the Australian Grand Prix Corporation,
I noticed that you're working as with F1 2021. Is that happening this year? Is that going ahead?
My understanding is the dates have shifted.
Right.
But I'm probably not the right person to give any sort of formal advice.
Who's going to win? Who's going to win? Come on, tell us more.
But it would be really exciting if it does.
That's a great organisation to work with, though.
It is. It's such an exciting atmosphere. I actually went down in March last year, just before COVID hit, and I was there in Melbourne on the day when they canned the event. So
I was going to say, didn't it all get shut down?
Yeah, really disappointed. So, notwithstanding that, they're able to use the index and provide some insight into their own well-being, and fatigue in particular, given the nature of that industry is quite tough. So apart from the F1 or the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, we've also used it on the New South Wales resource regulator. So they're the equivalent of safe work for all the mines and quarries in New South Wales. So they actually use it on their own employees.
Yeah, right.
Some insights. And more recently, some large corporates like Lockheed Martin, Holcim, and we've just finished a survey with a large services company that's also on the ASX as of yesterday. So we're in the midst of pulling all that information together for them.
I can guess who that is. You're obviously not saying, so that's fair enough. And what, any really specific, interesting findings that you've come up with? Any surprises?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say that every report is slightly different, which is pleasing because it tells us that it's not too generic and common. But there are some common trends that we're seeing. More recently, we did a webinar on our results for 2020 around health wellbeing. So the outstanding results or the highlights around health wellbeing hasn't been training, surprisingly enough, around a knowledge gap. It's been more around time pressures, job control, the management of change, and some of these things, and the impact that has on adverse effects on health wellbeing and adverse effects on sleep. So those sorts of things are certainly popping up. From a safety point of view, senior leaders having effective safety conversations and being visible in the workplace is often something that pops up, along with praise and recognition. I guess the common thread we're seeing across both health and safety is that there's a bit of a mismatch between people believing or wanting to do the right thing. So we've got some questions in there around beliefs and values. And then the actual behaviours or what's actually playing out in the workplace, particularly at the front line, is that the senior leaders and the organisations are setting the right tone and people want to do the right thing. There's things getting in the way. So what we're trying to highlight is, well, what are those things getting in the way, and how can we work with you to improve some of those behaviours, be it people compromising safety or taking shortcuts or walking past things and that are at-risk behaviours or unacceptable risks without intervening. So those sorts of things are highlighted, not only at an organisational level, but we're able to slice and dice information based on geography, based on business unit, and those demographic data points that we can put into organisations to help them make informed decisions around their strategy. Often strategic approaches and choices that people make are blanket rather than being very specific. So this allows people to be really specific on how they allocate resources. A good example is that we did a survey recently, and an age group of males between 19 and 25 popped up as having a bit of a red flag around health and wellbeing. So automatically, rather than having a broad brushed approach around health and wellbeing, it was like, okay, well, let's continue to do these common and core things that are important, but let's do some more specific initiatives based on this cohort and delve a little bit deeper into this area to understand what's working and what needs to be improved.
Yeah. That's fantastic. It's interesting. I think I'm just before we started recording today, I mentioned to you that I had recently had a podcast guest, Dr. Natalie Galea, and who I'll certainly introduce you to, and she's doing a lot of work around started off her studies on women, and then it's moved into sort of the human rights of workers. And a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is true. And she's also finding that in organizations, you might have training and initiatives that are sitting up here, and so from a cultural point of view, they look as if they've got a set of behaviors, actions, and cohesive culture, but the trickle down just isn't happening. It doesn't fall down. It doesn't, people are still behaving as they always have done below. They're sort of paying it. I'm not sure if it's a case of paying it lip service, but maybe it's because they're just too bloody busy to be able to actually implement and take these things into consideration as much as organizations would like them to.
Yeah, definitely. Look, we are seeing that. We call it the dilution effect.
Right.
And it's a bit like Chinese whispers sometimes too. And it's not necessarily because people are always doing a bad job either. Sometimes it's just the nature of organisations and the capability of organisations. Look, it does make sense that your more senior leaders are more capable. Notwithstanding that, if you do have a large organisation, or you do have an organisational structure with lots of different layers, the ability to communicate effectively through those layers does become challenging. So trying to cut through that and really execute and drive those right behaviours, is a challenge for a lot of organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so where next for the health and safety index? Are you evolving it as it comes along? As you learn things? Are you sort of able to adjust it, or are you tailoring it for specific clients? How does that work?
Yeah, so we have a product roadmap that we're working towards in terms of making improvements. Our focus at the moment is to really embed the recent changes that we made based on the feedback we got from our organisational psychologist, and create a really strong benchmark. So we've got a general benchmark at the moment. So the more and more people that use it, the more and more robust we believe that the benchmark will become. So our focus really is not to make this a super expensive activity and lots of barriers for access. We've actually made it really accessible, both from a commercial point of view in terms of a user experience, to be able to get more and more people on board to use it, to the point where we've actually had some other consultants come to us and asked us if they could use it as well. So
yeah, brilliant.
We've set up a partnership program to allow other consultants to use it by way of helping them and their clients as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, congratulations. That's really a success when your peers are interested in your work as well. So congratulations. Mark, I know that you're very busy. I've got a busy day ahead of me as well, but I've really enjoyed talking to you and hearing about what your organisation is doing and your success as well. So thank you and congratulations. We always finish on the same question, and we're always interested to know what people's answers might be. But tell us what are you excited about at the moment? What are you looking forward to?
Look, there's two big things that are happening this weekend. From a personal level, we're building a new house. We're actually doing a prefab build out of Melbourne. We live in Sydney.
Yes, you mentioned that, yeah.
And we've engaged a builder to build this new home of ours in Melbourne and ship it up, 5 modules on the back of a truck. So that's something very, very exciting, a bit nerve-wracking. We get the final numbers in today on how much it's going to cost. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I'm excited or more nervous at the moment around that one.
All right, well, good luck with that one.
Yeah, and from a work perspective, we've got the team coming down this weekend. We've got an awards night tomorrow night.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we've been elected as finalists in the Australian Small Business Champion Awards.
Brilliant.
So, getting the team together doesn't happen often, given that we're all working in a bit of a virtual world now. So yeah, we're all pumped, and we're going to go out tomorrow and have a long lunch, and hopefully we can celebrate a little bit more tomorrow night at the awards evening.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, well, fingers crossed. I've got my fingers crossed for you. But as you say, just nice to be able to connect with people in real life, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think apart from connecting with people that you talk to every day on WhatsApp in person, it's nice to have an event where we can sort of get together and do a few high fives and hopefully recognise the team for all the hard work that they've done this year.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Elbow bumps, by the way. Actually, I think you can high five now. Mark, thank you again. It's been a real pleasure to have you on. Hopefully we'll talk to you again at some other point, but thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Paddy.
Integrated Infrastructure is powered by North Search, specialists in executive and technical search across engineering, design, construction, property and energy markets in Australia. If you'd like to find out more about North Search or get involved with this podcast, you can click on the links in the show notes or email me directly at the address on the screen. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Integrated Infrastructure. Please tell your friends and colleagues if you did, and we hope to see you again soon.